let's get down now to answering questions. How you answer questions, how you start to develop your response to a certain question, or how you start to develop the way that the different types of answers that you can have towards specific types of questions. Before I do that though, another quick note that I just wanted to plug in here. Remember, you must take a position when you answer the question. This is in the rules, this is on the ballot, and I've emphasized this multiple times because it is the most important part of Extemp. You must take a position on a question. You cannot just answer the question with your opinion or your interpretation. You must take a position, you must take a stand on why that is the case. Regardless of what type of question it is, a judge should be able to easily identify your stance on it. So keep that in mind as we're going through the following methods to work through answering a question. A judge should be able to tell what your question is and what stance you're taking because of your answer easily, regardless of what form your answer takes. This will often take the form of your thesis statement. Your answer to the question, your stance, your claim is going to take the form of your thesis statement. The claim that you're making, the thing that you are saying is true or ought to be true in the future. Yes?
So you're a fan of, are you more a fan of, or do you do more often using, like, and my answer to this is yes, we're going to be looking at how it is through my 3 points, or my answer to this is yes, and then they go into their thesis statement like this will affect da-da-da-da.
Okay, actually I'll get to that here. Because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but your question is kind of when you're answering closed-ended questions, because obviously when you're answering open-ended questions, kind of your thesis statement is your answer, right? But your question is kind of specific to closed-ended questions, like yes, but, or yes, and here's my thesis. So I'm actually going to cover that right here. So good segue, thank you. Many of these questions, many of the closed-ended questions, just like Josh was saying, can and should be answered with an emphatic and simple yes or no. A lot of times when we have a closed-ended question, it is enough to just say, my answer to this question is an unequivocal no. And then you can move into your points. Your points are kind of what you're going to try to prove, but your stance is simple. Your thesis is simply one word, yes or no. Most of the time your closed-ended questions are going to have that one-word thesis that just says yes or no. I agree with this statement or I disagree with this statement. In essence, what you do when you do that, what you do when you answer a question with yes or no, is you basically, your stance, your thesis becomes the question. So if the question is, should the United States reform the minimum wage, and your answer is yes, your thesis, understandably so, is that the United States should reform the minimum wage. If your answer to that question is no, then your assumed thesis is the United States should not reform the minimum wage. So by answering with a one-word emphatic yes or no, you are giving your thesis, you're giving your claim, you're giving your stance, your position on something. Once you do that, though, you do want to go down into your points, as you were saying, and say, these are the reasons, these are the justifications behind why that is true. That can actually be contained within a thesis statement as well. You can't have a thesis statement. It's just not always necessary with a closed-ended question. And if you can plan to eliminate a sentence, that's probably 7-8 seconds that you have to talk about other stuff. So answering closed-ended questions with a yes or no usually assumes and infers your thesis within it. This will give you the simplest claim to prove, increasing the likelihood that you'll be able to prove your case. The problem with answering something and then adding another thesis on top of it is that you have more that you have to prove. You have more that you have to try to convince a judge of. It is most effective if you have a simple claim, if you have a narrow claim. If you have that simple or narrow claim, there's going to be a higher likelihood, there's going to be a higher likelihood that you're going to actually be able to prove that you're going to actually be able to convince a judge of a certain position, of the position that you are taking. The simpler, the narrower that your perspective is, the more effect it's going to have. With that said, don't be afraid to answer yes, but, or no, but. I do this a lot. A lot of times when an answer to a yes or no or a closed-ended question is really simple because I have a piece of evidence that says, look, this is true. Like, Donald Trump will be elected or something like that. Or Donald Trump is leading in the polls. And the question is Donald Trump leading in the polls? That's just a really simple example. And I have a piece of evidence that says, look, simply Donald Trump is leading in the polls. My answer would be yes, But, and then I would provide some analysis on top of that. Yes, and here's why. Or maybe if it was asking something, will the United States reform the minimum wage? My answer might be yes, but they shouldn't. So I can prove that they're going to reform the minimum wage, but I can also prove why they shouldn't. I can also analyze. I can also give myself the opportunity to dive deeper, to go deeper by having that but or and to kind of add a little bit more if a closed-ended answer is not enough. If it is not enough to answer and give your stance, your full stance, then don't be afraid to expand it. This is kind of what Josh was talking about a second ago. That's totally fine. You can expand it a little bit more if it's necessary, but only if it's necessary. Yeah.
Have you ever had judges that don't understand that the answer to the question is your thesis statement?
That does happen. One thing that I do to mitigate that is I will usually rephrase the question as a statement as I move into my points. So I'll say I'm going to cover my 3 points. My first point is XYZ, my second point is ABC, my third point is DEF, etc. I wouldn't actually say that, but let's just say for the sake of argument that I did. And then I would say all of these things prove why the United States should reform the minimum wage. And then I'll move on. So when you do answer a closed-ended question with a yes or a no, it is good to rephrase it as a statement as you transition to cater to those types of judges who might look for a thesis statement. For most people, they find that a thesis statement is contained within your answer. If you make your answer very clear, they'll say, yes, that's the answer. I know what his stance is. I know what his position is. A few will need a little bit more. Sometimes as you start to grow more in perceiving judges' reactions and interpreting judges' reactions, you can judge that. When you say, my answer to this question is an unequivocal yes, and somebody looks down at their ballot at the developing thesis part and looks back up at you with a panicked look in their eyes, you know that, oh look, I need to give my thesis a little bit later here, or they're going to be like, I didn't see your thesis, now I'm confused. Usually though, if you read them, they seem like they're following, they seem like it's making sense. You don't need to. I got in the habit of doing it every speech, just rephrasing it as a statement, but you don't have to. Okay. Let's talk about answering open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are the worst. I hate open-ended questions. Like, even if I physically hate what I am about to talk about, I will choose a question that is closed-ended instead of open-ended because I just hate these so much. Anyway, present your solution or your justifications in your answer. So if the question is, what should the United States do about the minimum wage? My answer would be, well, my answer is pretty simple. The United States should regulate it on a state-by-state basis and let the states have control. That would be my answer to that. I give my position, I give my claim contained within the answer to that open-ended question. This is going to be more akin to the thesis statement in an essay or a platform speech. This is kind of what Josh was talking about. If you say yes and all this other stuff is also what I believe, that's basically what you are forced into doing when you answer an open-ended question. It's going to be very similar to a thesis statement if you write essays or papers. Basically, you're just going to outline your claim. You're going to outline your argument or the thing that you are going to try to prove. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Narrow is better. Remember, we choose closed-ended questions and closed-ended answers because they're narrower, and narrower is better because you can actually prove it. The same thing goes with open-ended. The more specific you can be with how you respond to something, the more effective you're going to be in communicating that point to a judge. So don't bite off more than you can chew. Make sure that you are very specific in the way that you answer an open-ended question. Yes.
In open-ended questions, you kind of have an outline already in your head for those kind of questions, say, or like different reasonings why you should, use the way I answer the question or your solution.
Could you explain that a little bit more? I'm sorry.
So, you know how when you go into the round, do you have an outline in your head of what kind of things you'll say, like what each point will be, why you should advocate your solution, or is it just once you get into the round then?
That's kind of, you can do that. I don't.
Sure.
I usually just wait till I get in the round. I usually suffer when I have something that's formulaic. When I have some sort of organization, I do better when my mind just processes through things and is forced to in a circumstance. If you work better having a formula that you can plug stuff in, some people do. Some people do that really well. Some people will speak a lot worse if they just try to come up with it on the spot instead of having something organized in their head already. I don't know if that's you or not. Think about what you are, what your style is though, and start to diagnose whether that's true. You can do either though.
Okay.
I did it in the round, but yeah. Also with things like this, with open-ended questions especially, it can really help to wait until you're in the round, because then you can look up and make sure you fit your points or your claim to the evidence that you have. Because you're not going to have infinite evidence. You're going to have a limited amount. And so if you just don't have something, then even if that point was in your mind, you're not going to be able to argue it because you don't have evidence for it.
Yeah.
So sometimes it can be better to wait to see what you have evidence for and then move on from there.
Alright.
But you should have plenty of time to think about an outline, but if you want to think through some general outlines in your head, that will work really well too.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of this is all about personal style. If your personal style is to do something, if your brain works in a certain way, understand that, diagnose that, and be willing to act within that. There's not one way to do Extemp. There's a lot of people who do it very, very differently. So think through what your style is the more you compete in it. Okay. Answering descriptive questions. All right, when you answer a descriptive question, be sure to give a clear answer. These are usually yes or no. If there is a question like, is the U.S. economy on the verge of collapse, or something along those lines, that's going to be usually phrased as a yes or no question. Descriptive questions are usually going to be yes or no. Has the United States failed to accomplish its goals for international stability? The answer to that question is going to be yes or no. I can't think of a question that I would classify as being descriptive that I wouldn't answer with a yes or a no. So most of them are going to take the form of yes or no. So answer them very clearly, answer them very specifically like we were talking about earlier. However, as you think through your thesis, think through developing a history of the issue. Develop in your mind what's going on. Develop in your mind how you understand the way things are going. The way you understand it, the way you understand a situation is going to be the most effective way that you can communicate something. If you understand something, if you understand, let's say it's about Russia invading Japan or something. Let's say that Russia invaded Japan and you have to give extent speeches about it. So Russia invades Japan. Your best history lesson, your best description of that event is going to be the way that you understand it. That's the way that it's going to fit best in your mind. So as you're developing your thesis, as you're thinking through your answer to a descriptive question, think through how you understood the issue. Think through a history. Give yourself a little bit of a lesson before you start to answer the question on what is going on, what your opinion on it is, and use that to help you supplement your answer to the question. That's something that you can do specific to descriptive questions. Descriptive questions are often the most teaching-oriented questions, so teach them as such. When you have a descriptive question, you're just talking to somebody about the way things are. You're educating them. You're showing something to them. You're not trying to prove something to them. These are going to be teaching-oriented, so think of it a little bit less like a persuasive and think of it a little bit more like an OO. If you do platforms, OOs are usually more speeches that are just trying to inform somebody or expose a topic or show somebody something. Persuasives are trying to get people to believe something. You want to make sure that you focus more on informing them and educating them than on proving them, especially in descriptive questions. All right. Now let's move on to questions of degree and timing. These questions I kind of grouped together because I just put them on the same slide. They're not the same. So I'm not saying that they're like you answer them the same way. I just put them on the same slide. Okay? For both of these types of questions, identifying the question should be enough to narrow your focus. If you say, oh, this is a question of degree, then most of your argument's going to be, all right, how bad is it? How bad is this thing going to be? Your thesis statement, these are usually going to be pretty open-ended. Your thesis statement is going to be something along the lines of, this will have a major impact, or a minor impact, or a neutral impact, or it won't really impact it at all. It won't have any effect. It won't really change anything. Your answer to those are really going to be just clarified and identified by what question you think it is. The same thing is true with time. For timing, make sure you introduce your justification as to why now is the time. Make sure you prove why now is a unique opportunity, especially the earlier you can do this in your answer to this question, the better and the more effective it's going to be. If you can prove this in the very beginning of your speech, it's going to help you throughout the rest of your speech as well. So think through why now is the time and make sure to craft your answer in the context of that unique opportunity. For degree, provide some standard of measurement when you answer the question. Give it some standard, like you're saying, okay, we're going to judge how significantly Donald Trump will affect our policies with Russia in terms of global stability. Will it positively affect global stability, or will it negatively affect global stability, and how bad will that effect be? You want to make sure that you have some sort of standard of measurement so you're talking and comparing two things at the same time. Yes?
So just run through impact calculus?
Yes, basically. For all my TPers, you know what I'm talking about. For all of you who are not my TPers, you should be my TPers. Okay.